Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. In manufacturing, there are good plants and good cultures. We have relationships where we get along and we're doing well. Yet we're just not getting to that point of greatness. And there's something missing, and we're figuring this out today. We know what we should do, we understand it, and we're telling people, yet there's these gaps. And in San Antonio, Texas today, I brought in my expert friend with no nonsense on the neuroscience, Jeff Nally, to help us figure this out. What is going on, Jeff?
Hey, it's good to see you. Great to be here.
So you got to tell me from your side, and you work with manufacturing plants, and you've been coaching for many years, and you've been human resources in manufacturing plants. You've developed coaching programs. You do coaching and lead other coaches around the world. And you're currently working with manufacturing plants. What are you seeing, Jeff, when plants are looking to get from point A to point B and they get stuck?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I looked at that question and I thought that it would be mostly that teams inside manufacturing want their leaders to tell them what to do, support them in their work, be extra kind, be extra nice. It turns out that's not it. I work with a 360 firm that does stakeholder feedback for manufacturing leaders. I got to look at data across hundreds of manufacturing leaders. And the number one thing that teams said they wanted from their leader is, tell me what the vision and mission are. And tell me over and over and over again. Now, I was kind of stumped by this. I thought, this can't be right, but it was so crystal clear and so consistent. It turns out that in manufacturing, if we tell people where we're going and where you're trying to lead them, what the vision and mission is, the big picture, the end game, then they know what to do. They tend to follow instructions. They tend to be more autonomous, and they will do the right thing to get to that end game. And I've seen this happen over and over and over again. It's not about making the widget. It's about making sure the widget goes in the car that somebody's going to drive because they love the feel of how that car drives.
So what is it? Is it a matter of, you can't just bring people in a boardroom and say, this is the vision. So like, how does this transform? Because there's people, well, hey, I told the team, they should know. Why don't they know? We posted on the wall. I sent out the memo. We had the meeting, Jeff. What's going on?
That's right. You have the big meeting. There's a big poster on the wall. But the point is, in the day-to-day work as leaders, what we need to say is, so our goal is to make sure the person who buys this car feels like it's the most solid car they've ever driven. So for today's work, how will we do this to make sure that experience happens for the customer? We have to be great storytellers. So if you're a manufacturing leader and you don't have a really good picture, a great description, a story of what the end game is, what success looks like, you need to have that for yourself and to be able to tell it crisply, clearly, succinctly, and you need to believe it. Because if you don't believe it, they won't believe it. But the more we put what success looks like and what our vision and mission are, then other people on our teams get what they say they need from leaders, which we're not giving them now. And two, they actually help us achieve that.
Speaking of stories then, Jeff, so what's a story that you can help us connect to what you're saying here? What are we?
Yeah. So one of my great experiences in this, like, what's the vision and mission and how does this fold in, was actually about myself when I worked in manufacturing. I worked for an aluminum company that created molten aluminum and then cooled it and rolled it into huge aluminum coils. Every product weighed at least 30,000 pounds. And then our customers turned it into other things, right? So it's a commodity. And it's 60 acres under roof. There's no machine that's less than 3 stories tall. It's like Disneyland for adults. It is so exciting and so interesting. But I was taking a guest from Australia who had come into the US to see our process on a tour. And I had him in my golf cart and I had my steel-toed shoes on and we were driving around and I said, we're going to start at the beginning of the process. And I went out to the back of the plant where we have crushed aluminum cans that get chopped up and put into the furnace. It's one of the primary ingredients into our aluminum. And then I said, which I knew, but it didn't hit me. I said, by the way, the plant you're in now is the largest purchaser of recycled aluminum cans in the United States. We are the feeder for the reason why so many people across North America are recycling. It's because they want it to be used again, and we're the number one purchaser of it. And that's when I realized, I love all the products that our customers make from the aluminum that goes out the end of the plant. But what I was really excited about was we are connected to every household or every person that tosses an aluminum can into a recycle bin. And I was able to bring that story to life for myself. It helped me in my own work. It helped me draw a line of sight to why this matters. And what I loved about a 30,000 pound coil of beautiful aluminum that got shipped out on a truck, which many people in the plant could not get excited about. So tell the story of what resonates for you, even in the process of your manufacturing world, but tie it to why that matters in the overall picture, the grand scheme of things.
So if we bring this down to our listener right now, they're driving into the plant. They're, say, a supervisor in an aluminum steel making plant. They have a process which they need to lead their team today, who's coming in to make that same steel again. And how do you take that bigger area of saying, okay, we understand what that bigger vision is, and how do you tie it into the day-to-day?
Exactly. So I was leading a virtual workshop for 124 manufacturing leaders last week. And they all asked the same question. How do we do what we're supposed to do next? So what now? And it turns out what you do is to ask powerful questions that help everybody on the team get their work done. I asked in the chat, how do you hold people accountable to do that? And everybody wrote in things they did to hold people accountable. Put it in writing. Tell them about it at the beginning of the shift. Scream at them when they do it wrong, right? So I said,
sign off on it.
I know exactly right. I didn't do that, but I said, okay, all right. So I apologize because all of us who led organization development and thought we were experts in this performance area in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, we taught you all to do that. And it turns out that's wrong. But now we have neuroscience that said people will do things when you engage their brain instead of tell them what to do. So instead of holding people accountable, which sounds like, wringing their necks, you have to create accountability with them. And we do that with simple questions. So when you're trying to get somebody or a team to do something, start with this first question, which is, so tell me what the end game is. What's the vision? What's the purpose of what you're trying to do? So does that sound familiar, right? Mm-hmm. What's the vision, mission? What's the end purpose? And when they tell you that, you should be able to go in your head and say, is that where we're headed or is that not where we're headed? And if it is, then they're on the right track. If they're not, you call a little time out and say, that's interesting, but where we're really headed is this, and describe what success looks like for the project or for that piece of work or for the end game. What is the purpose? Where are we headed? What's the end game? The second question is, so are you finished with that work? Yes or no? And they answer yes, then you do an after action review. How'd it go, right? Mm-hmm. Show me the end product. Are we all done here? If they say no, which they will because we're always a work in progress, then you ask, great, what % complete are you finished right now? Okay, now I know that sounds like a weird question, but our brains are really good at estimating how clear or how finished or how much something is done. And when you ask someone on your team, well, just tell me what % complete do you think you are right now? And they'll go, and they'll take a minute to think. That's okay. That's the co-creating accountability part of their brain firing up. And they'll say, I'm like 60% along. Great. Your next question is, what makes it 60% complete for you instead of 0? Not 100. We all know what complete success looks like and when work is finished. What we want to know is what makes it 60% complete for them. And they'll think for a second and they'll go, well, I tried this and this piece worked on the machine. And then we put another piece in and it got closer to spec. And now we know what the specs are. They will tell you what they have been doing to get close to completion, perfection, or finished. Then your next question is, what have you learned now that you're 60% along? As leaders, we typically never ask, what have you learned? But when you ask what people have learned, one, they tell you what they're learning and what makes them autonomous or engaged or better at their work. And if you're a manager who has to fill out HR forms for developing your team, and I know you do because I created those for you, at one point, when you ask them, what have you learned? That goes in the development plan. Oh, they've already learned this. They've learned that. Maybe there are things they haven't learned, but it helps you create what they need to know next, a new skill, a new way of doing things, whatever it is that develops and grows them. What have you learned so far? And people will tell you what they learned, and you listen as a manager because that's powerful. And then you ask them the question that most managers never ask, and it's the feely woo-woo question, which is, how do you feel about the work you've done so far now that you're 60% along? Now, I know everybody's going to say, I am never going to ask people how they feel. But if you don't, you are not an emotionally and socially intelligent leader. Even though it sounds weird coming out of your mouth, everybody loves to have someone ask them, how do you feel about what you've done? And they will tell you, I feel confident, I feel proud, I feel confused, I'm worried. You get to know as a manager where you get to help. And then ask them, what's the next thing that you need to do to move it from 60% to 70% complete? And they will tell you what they think their next step is. And that's important because then you can figure out, are they headed in the right direction or not? And you can course correct or support them in that. And then the last question is, what do you need from me as your leader to make that happen? Now, Trevor, this will not surprise you, but this will surprise most listeners. If you ask those questions, you have not told anyone what to do. You have asked 7, 8, or 9 questions that engages a leader's brain. It takes 90 seconds to 2 or 3 minutes. It's not a long, complicated therapy session, but you have asked questions. And what we know from neuroscience is the team member that answers those questions, what goes off in their brains is a big boost of dopamine and oxytocin. All the feel-good neurochemicals that you feel when you sit down to your favorite meal, or when you go on vacation, or you see your loved one get off a plane that you haven't seen in a long time. It doesn't matter. The brain doesn't know the difference. But what goes off in the team member's brain is, my leader understands me. My leader listens to me. I get to be the voice in the room to tell my leader what's going on, if I'm finished, what I think, how I feel. That's not just engaging at a fluffy level. That is deep accountability so they can get work done without you having to tell them everything to do, without you having to have the reputation of being the command and control supervisor in the plant. And here's the winner. It takes all the pressure off you as the supervisor or leader from having to hold people accountable. You get to enable and create accountability in them so you can go off and do all the other things you have to do as a leader, and they can get stuff done as a team.
That is beautiful. And if you're a listener to this podcast, or you're not, you're going to hear it many times. How you show up impacts on how people feel. And that determines the extent which they can engage. So asking them how they feel about that, what a great reflection. There's a client, and she looks after large process, and on one of the sub-assemblies where you got to get basically 6 pallets out in a day, at the beginning of the day, the team member's walking out thinking, and says out loud, like, I'll be lucky to get 4 or 5 today. It's like, oh my gosh. So that emotion strikes at first. It's kind of like, why are you saying that? And, but she took a different approach, and she said, what do you need from me to get to that 6? And started that path and created some dialogue. Is that the start that you're looking for, Jeff? Like, is that what you're seeing if we can start with those different type of approaches?
It is. And what she did, and what she did is what all of us do as managers. We are trained to look for the gap. It's not six pallets complete. What we are trained to look at as managers and supervisors is what's not done. What's the gap? And she was looking at knowing in the back of her mind, there should be 6 pallets complete. There's only 4. Where we go wrong as leaders is we focus on the pallets that aren't complete. And if the team could have done it, they would have. What she did that was so smart was, first of all, she asked, what can I do to help you get closer to 6 the next time? She could also ask, what went well that got you to 4 pallets complete for today? Because the team probably needs more of whatever that is so they can get closer to 5 or 6. If they knew what they could get better at to get 6 pallets, they would have done it. Not every employee and every team is out to tear down the company, knock bricks off the wall, and refuse to get work done. Most people just want the resource, or they want guidance, or they don't know what they did well to get 4 done that they can amplify or get more of so they can get 6 completed for the day.
It's that channeling that positive energy. We know that focusing on what's well broadens and builds our mind. It makes us feel more safe. It just changes our mindset. And this whole concept of asking those right questions. I mean, I love what you said too, Jeff. It takes the pressure off us, right? It doesn't matter if we got to make sure this person gets the 6 pallets. It's like, hey, what went well when you get 4? What do you need more of? So the same leader, she has a variety of ages and experience on the team. And sometimes when we're making improvements and there's changes, there's resistance. And another one of her great questions was when there's changes like that was, she asked, what are your apprehensions? What do you think of that question, Jeff?
I think that's a great question. You mentioned keeping things positive. Positive doesn't mean that it's all fluffy and it's not holding people accountable and we're not going to get the work done. It means engaging people's brains, because we'll shut down unintentionally if we think things are negative or defensive for some reason. But if you have a positive posture, a continuous improvement posture, it tends to enlighten people's brains. It's a good question that she asked. What are you apprehensive about? An even better question is, and it's a little more direct, is what's the one thing you're worried about that keeps you from getting this done today? It's okay to ask people on the team what they're worried about. We are human beings. We are all worried about something at work, at home, in our faith community, in our volunteer work, in our neighborhoods. We are not just machines and robots that crank out good work all the time. We have worries. And when you ask people, what's the one thing you're worried about? It keeps them from kind of spiraling into, I have so many worries, right? Our brains want to respond to one question and focus on one thing, which is why it's always good as a leader, especially in a complicated manufacturing process, to say things like, what's the one thing you're worried about right now? What's the one thing I could do to help you in your work today? What's the one thing we could do better as a team to get 5 pallets out today instead of 4? What's the one thing? Our brain is focused on utility and clarity. If we know what's useful, then we are able to come up with that answer and do it. And when we ask, what's the one thing, our brain goes to utility. What is the one thing that would make the biggest difference for blank? And then they'll tell us what it is. We don't have to stand in confusion or mystery. We just have to ask the right questions. All the best leaders don't have all the answers. All the best leaders ask all the right questions.
I love the accuracy and how specific you get to that question, Jeff. Sometimes we're just looking at that broader view. It's kind of like going back to what you're saying about that broader vision. Because some leaders will say, well, yeah, I'm a great leader because I run autonomous teams and I totally step back. But at the same time, they're not getting into those details. They don't want to micromanage. They're kind of like stuck between that area. And by asking those more specific questions of your team, you're not telling them what to do, but you're getting down to that detail of like what's holding them back, and you're coaching them through that 40%, right? We're at the 60%. Right. You can't just step back and say, here's the vision, now go get her done. Because you talk about what you set up years ago and now people need to change. And I'd be like, just go make it happen. Well, that's not the greatness of leadership.
No, that's right. Even if you have a great, autonomous, self-actualized team like you just described, use those questions to tap the pulse of how things are going. What's the end game? Are you finished or not? What percent complete are you? What have you learned so far? What makes it 60% complete instead of 0? How do you feel about the work you've done so far? What are you worried about? What's the next thing you think you're going to do? Those are great check-in questions to make sure all the things that need to get done still get done. Autonomous teams don't mean that their leader has abandoned them. It means their leader trusts them, builds their capability, but also uses those great questions to check in, make sure things are okay. We never just leave them. It's like raising a child. And our son is 22 now, so I can say this. There are some points at which I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. This is too hard. I'm just going to quit. You seem to be able to feed yourself and bathe yourself. I'm just going to let you be autonomous and go on about your way, even though you're 8 years old. It doesn't work that way. You have to keep checking in, developing, growing, and raising until they don't need any more assistance with that piece of their work, with that piece of their autonomy, with that piece of their expertise. But just as we know, and probably what you're experiencing as you listen to this right now, I don't know any manufacturing leader or company that is not in the midst of tremendous change. I know we have great processes and we put things in place and we think they're static, but as a leader in manufacturing, they're not. And just like continually checking the pulse of how our child is growing up and what I need to do new or different as a parent to keep them growing as they change. These questions that Trevor and I have shared today are what you use to check in with your team, to check in with individuals, even if they're growing up really smart, even if they're becoming very autonomous, because you need to shift what you do as a leader so they can be even more autonomous and create even better accountability for themselves. And if your organization or industry or product is in the midst of tremendous change, that's another layer of, we're not going to be able to do it the same way we did it yesterday. And so we start this learning and these questions all over again. Accountable teams, self-actualized teams, teams that hold themselves accountable and do great work are never meant to be abandoned. You are still their leader.
What I'm taking away from this, Jeff, is just another level for me on the mindfulness aspect of, yes, rather than telling and we ask questions, but that mindful leader is the one that's changing the questions based on where that person they're talking to is at. But you can't ask the same question because everyone's in a different place. So what I'm hearing is that really checking in with that person. And as your team or your leader is growing, are you evolving with them and changing that level of questions and keep on connecting it back to that bigger vision with the right questions? And I love this. I'm just fired up and inspired to listening to you. So what is the last message when the listeners walk away and they said, hey, I heard Jeff Nally speak on mindfulness manufacturing. What do you want them to leave them thinking?
I want everyone listening to leave with, I'm going to ask one question today that I haven't asked before that helps create accountability in the person on my team instead of me thinking I have to have all the answers. And by the way, when you do this, it's okay to tell them that you're going to ask them a question you haven't asked before. Because if you walk into your team and just start saying, so on a scale of 0 to 100%, what percent complete are you? And you've never asked that question before, they're going to look at you like you just stepped off of a UFO, right? What planet are you from? Tell them, look, so I usually tell you what to do, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions today instead of start off with instructions. Is that okay? And the person in front of you or the team in front of you go, well, sure. And if they look at you weird, blame it on this podcast. Tell them, I listened to Trevor's podcast. I learned something new. I want to try it. And is it okay if I do that? And they'll go, sure. And then ask those questions and get the responses and watch their brains light up. You will see them be more engaged. But more importantly, you will learn more as a leader of what you don't need to focus on, what you don't need to command and control, and where you can help, train, build capability, and get teams to create accountability instead of trying to force or hold them accountable. Just ask one question today and see how it goes.
And if I can have some clarity on what I don't need to focus on, I'm willing to try the one question. Thanks so much for coming on, Jeff.
My pleasure.
You are awesome. Hey folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.